on time. However, there will be a little change. All right? All right? Let's go. Sorry. Okay. There will be a little change. This next session will be shorter, and the other one will be longer. We'll go from now till from 1:35 to 2:30, then have the break, and then start again at about 2:45, and go on to 4. Okay. Now let me finish with what we were dealing with earlier. What we had said earlier was that Judaism is a land-centered faith for a reason. For a reason. The reason being that God wished the Jewish people not to be influenced by outside forces, and to create their own state. And am levadad yishkon, it is the people that shall dwell alone. Isolation is a Jewish concept, not integration. That is not a Jewish concept. Isolation, to be alone, to be separate, and to have a separate growth. A separate growth. You can love Gentiles and respect them. Shalom, good morning. That's that. Now, if that is so, 2 things follow from it. One, as I had mentioned earlier, it means that Jews are not allowed to live in the Galilee, and they should live in the land of Israel. And secondly, it implies something about non-Jews who live in Israel. And that is, what should the status of non-Jews be in Israel? I just received, where is Shireen? Where's Shireen? Shireen has disappeared. She just gave me a letter to the local Syracuse Jewish paper from an Orthodox rabbi of the young Israel there, who not only who has his share of ignorance, but worst of all, he compounds it with arrogance. The arrogance of ignorance. Shireen, that letter from the newspaper, you have it with you? Just for a second. Let me have it. I think it's an important thing. So, now bear in mind this is an Orthodox rabbi, God help us, and I'm going to read just part of it. He of course says that what Kahane says is terrible, isn't true. The Judaism that I know teaches that you shall love the stranger, Deuteronomy 10:19, and that you shall not oppress him, Exodus 22:20. This is the Torah ideal. Kahane advocates measures beyond moral justifiability. He wants to expel Arabs in the same way that Jews have been mistreated and expelled for centuries. The Torah teaches the opposite when it says that you shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the heart of the stranger. Agree with Kahane if you like, but do not confuse his message with that of Judaism. Now, obviously, smicha does not a rabbi make. And I think it's important to realize that this person is not the person. He is a symbol. He is a concept. Countless rabbis who really are ignorant, say the same thing. People think that the purpose of going to yeshiva is to get smicha. It's not true. The purpose is to become a scholar. Only in America did smicha become like, my son is a doctor, my son is a lawyer, my son is a rabbi. It's a profession. It's a profession. Judaism was never a profession. To be a rabbi is not a profession. To be a rabbi is to mean that someone has reached a certain level of learning and he's now going on further. goes to yeshiva to become a Talmid Chacham, a scholar, not to be a rabbi? In any case, let's try to understand this in the context of what we were saying. Clearly, when the Torah said that the Jewish people should live in one country and not be influenced by the outside culture, it clearly meant that the Jewish people should have their own state which they control under Torah law. And that obviously means that a non-Jew has no say in what the state is. Now, this person here confuses oppression with equality. First of all, let us understand what the halakha says about the role of the non-Jew and his status. We quoted earlier the Psalms in chapter 105 that says, "And he gave them the lands of the nations, and they inherited the labor of peoples, that they might observe his statutes and keep his laws." That's why he gave us a state. That's why he took the land away from other people and gave it to us, so that we might observe his statutes. That's the whole purpose of a Jewish people and the Jewish state. If not that, there's no reason for it. That there's no reason to be a Jew. Now, what does that mean? Can you imagine? He takes the land from the people, and then he says, now I want you Jews to build a democratic society in which the peoples can have the right to win the country back through democracy after you took it from them. First of all, let's look at the two kinds of non-Jews. The non-Jew who lived there originally, before the Jews took it, and the non-Jew who never lived there. And while essentially the status is the same, nevertheless, in practice there is a great difference. The non-Jew who once lived there and was the majority before the Jews came and took that land will always harbor a hatred and a desire to take his land back, unless he's a Cretan. If he's normal and he believes the land was taken from him, of course he wants the land back. And that's what the Abarbanel, one of the great, great commentators on the Torah, brings down in Shemot, in Exodus 34. He brings down on the verse which says the following: "Observe thou that which I command thee this day. Behold, I drive out before the Amorite, and the Canaanite, and the Hittite, and so on and so forth. Take heed to thyself, lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land that you come upon, lest it be a snare in your midst." That's the verse. And the Abarbanel says on it, listen to a normal Jew. For having taken their land from them, there is no doubt that they would always seek the harm of Israel. My little grandchild can understand that. My Syracuse rabbi can't. And he continues, "And that is why the verse says, quote, the land that you come upon," meaning, since you, Israel, came upon the land to take it from its inhabitants, and they are, quote, robbed of it, how will they observe a covenant of love? It will rather be just the opposite. For there will be a snare in your midst, and when there will be a war, they will join your enemies and fight you. What normalcy? What sheer logic? A, B, C. Of course this is normalcy. He understands that. You don't give them rights so that to make it easier for them to take it from you. And so, the halakha is clear, despite this ignoramus here. The halakha says that when Joshua went into the land, he sent 3 options to the inhabitants. He sent them 3 options. And he said, whoever wishes to evacuate, let them evacuate. You want to leave, leave. If you wish to make peace, and you'll see under what conditions soon, let him make peace. To make war, go to war and you'll die. 3 choices. Go war, war. Peace under the condition that you see, peace. If not, leave. Those were the conditions of Joshua. And those conditions are based upon a clear halakha. And it is important that we understand what the halakha says. First of all, the halakha is based upon, as everything else, the original foundation of it is based upon verses in the Chumash, in the Torah. In Parshat Shoftim, chapter 20, in Dvarim, Deuteronomy, it says as follows: Ki tikrav el ir yilachem aleha. When you come nigh onto a city to fight against it, and immediately stop in the middle of the sentence. The rabbis in the Sifri say on this verse, "B'milchemet reshut hakatuv medaber." This is speaking about a voluntary war, and I must explain that to you carefully. And hopefully, if you meet this rabbi, you will explain it to him too, since he obviously doesn't know anything. In Judaism, there are 2 kinds of wars: an obligatory war, one which you must fight, and a voluntary war, one which you may fight. An obligatory war. There are 3 kinds of such wars. The 7 Canaanite nations, Amalek, and any time that the enemy starts a war with you, any enemy. That's an obligatory war. A voluntary war is if you want to go outside of Israel, for example, and start a war. That's a voluntary war under certain conditions. An obligatory war, there are no conditions. If it falls into that framework, you must go to war, gamal and finish. That's it. Any time, any place, no Sanhedrin, no prophet, you just go out. A voluntary war is more limited, so this is talking about a voluntary war. I mention that carefully because such rabbis of this ilk, not knowing the Sifri, not even knowing Rashi, because Rashi brings it right down there, will say, well, that's talking about the Canaanite nations. Understand that a voluntary war cannot be talking about the Canaanite nation. That is an obligatory war, period. In other words, any kind of war, even a voluntary war. That's what this is talking about. Now I'll continue. If you go to war, the first thing, V'karata elea l'shalom. You must first call out peace. See? The Torah wants peace. Now, this rabbi would love it. Peace. First, you must have peace. You must offer them peace. Of course, he'll jump and say, see? Yeah, you'll see what kind of peace they're talking about. V'karata elea l'shalom. First of all, you have to offer them a chance for peace, meaning surrender. As you'll see. Vayayim shalom ta'ancha. And if they will answer you, peace, we want peace. Upatchala. And the city opens up the gates and surrenders. Now, what is the peace? Vaya kolam hanimtzava. All the nation that is found in it shall be yulecha lemas v'avaducha. They shall be tribute and servitude. Tribute and servitude. That's the peace. That's peace. Tribute and servitude. That's peace. They're not equal citizens. They don't vote, they don't sit in the Knesset. There's tribute and servitude. The Sifri, the Midrash on this verse says the following. If they said, we accept tribute but not servitude but not tribute, you do not accept it unless they accept both. No conditions, both, or else war. Now, Maimonides, the Rambam takes down this law and he codifies it in his Mishnah Torah, in his great code of law. And he says, and he brings down the Sifri exactly what I just told you, so that you shouldn't think that I lied to you. And he says, if they agree to pay tribute but not accept servitude, or accepted servitude but not tribute, we do not acquiesce until they have accepted both. And servitude means, he's not going to define what do you mean by servitude. I make clear to you, this is the Rambam, and here is the source. Hilchot Melachim, the Law of Kings, chapter 6, verse 1. Chapter 6, verse 1. And here is what the Rambam, and I specifically bring down the Rambam, because he is known in all liberal circles as a progressive thinker. He was a doctor, he went to college. Listen to what the progressive, by the way, it's interesting. 3 years ago was the 850th anniversary of his birth, and so Israel made it that year, the year of the Rambam. That was the year that I filed 2 bills in the Knesset, word for word of the Rambam, that were both ruled racist. It's like living in hell. And here is what the Rambam, the progressive, says. And servitude means that they shall be humble and low, and not raise their head in Israel. Rather they shall be subjects under us, and not be appointed to any position over Jews ever. If I had written this, I'll bet that the High Court would go so far as to ban me. That's the halakha. This is the law. And he goes further. He expounds on it. And he expands on it in Hilchot Melachim, Law of Kings, chapter 1, halakha 4. When he says, he brings down the verse in the Torah, in Dvarim chapter 17, which says, thou shalt not place over thyself a stranger who is not of your brethren. It's talking about a king. Thou shalt not place over that. It says, Som tasim alecha melech, you shall, which in English is translated as, you shall surely place over you a king. You shall not place over yourself a stranger who is not of your brethren. The Talmud in Yevamot doesn't learn Som Tasim as thou shalt surely, because the Torah is not verses and prose and so on. Som Tasim, they ask the question, why does it say Som Tasim? If you know Hebrew, you can say Tasim, place over. What is Som Tasim? So they say this means that not only a king, but any authority which you place over you shall only be of your brethren. And Maimonides Rambam brings this down as follows. Not only a king, but the prohibition is for any authority in Israel. Not an officer in the armed forces. Not even a public official in charge of the distribution of water to the fields. And there is no need to mention that a judge or a chieftain shall only be from the midst of the people of Israel. Any authority that you appoint shall only be from the midst of thy people. That is the halakha. That is clear. The Ramis here doesn't even know that this exists. He probably went to YU, got his smicha in 4 years. I nothing against the YU. Let me finish. There are people in the Meir that also would know this either. It isn't only YU. What I said was that there were certain people in YU that go there primarily to learn Torah and also take secular courses. And then there are those that take secular courses and also go there to get smicha and get a job. The purpose of the halakha is clear. If the whole purpose of God was to tell Jews, don't live in America because their Gentiles will form concepts and cultures, so clearly he doesn't want these same Gentiles in Israel to control the country. And that's why the non-Jew has no share in the country. What he does have is personal rights. Absolute. If he agrees to accept this, then certainly he has to be treated nicely. He has to be treated properly. He has to be treated fairly. He has to be treated justly. He has to be treated just like a Jew in terms of decency. That's what the Torah means when it says, thou shalt not oppress the stranger. But there's a difference between oppressing him and making him equal to you politically. Now, the Talmud brings down this point so strongly that one wonder, I assume that he also never learned this. The rabbis tell us in the Gemara in Sota, page 34, they bring down the following. They bring down the story of how the Jews have now finally reached the Jordan River. Now, you of course know that they are not coming from west to east. They've already conquered the east bank of the Jordan. And now they're moving from east to west. So now they're about to cross over from the east bank of the Jordan, from Hussein's territory, to conquer the rest of the country. And God performs a miracle. And the Jordan River's waters stop. Now, unlike the splitting of the Red Sea, a sea is not a river. Rivers, for those people that live in cities, rivers come from a spring and they come down. Oceans or seas are oceans and seas. So when they split the Red Sea, the waters had to stand on both sides, split and so on. But here God merely stopped the waters from flowing from the north. And at a certain point, he stopped the water. So that south of that point, the waters flowed into the Dead Sea, and now there was dry land. But meantime, the waters kept on coming down to the point where they stopped, and that's the law of physics. Two objects can't occupy the same space at the same time. So they reached that point, and they started climbing. And so there was this massive wall, 12 by 12 miles, a frightening sight. And the Jews are now crossing the Jordan there. And the rabbis tell us, while still in the Jordan, Joshua said to them, he said, stop, I have something to tell you. Now, you imagine the reaction of the Jews to this. He said, of course, any time, but let's first cross over. He said, no, I have something to tell you right now, and specifically for a reason, while you're in the middle of this and with this horror over you. Now, what was so important? What was so urgent that he had to tell them right now while this frightening wall is there? Shabbos? No, Shabbos is an important thing, but it wasn't that. Kosher food? Very important, not that. Learning Torah? The most important, but not that either. The rabbis say as follows. Joshua said to them, know why you are crossing the Jordan. In order that you drive out the inhabitants. If you do this, it shall be good. If not, the waters shall come and inundate you and me. That is what the only thing he found it necessary to say. Because he knew that if they did not do that, there would not be Shabbos, there would not be kosher food, there would not be Torah. The Jews would be driven out of their own land. That's the Talmud. That's why the Talmud is normal. That's why the rabbis once were normal. We're normal. And that's why this ignoramus babbles about non-Jews. Now let me first of all go into this thing, because he's not the only one. He's not the only one. But before I do that, let me just quote to you. The Chumash in Bamidbar, in Numbers, chapter 33, brings down the following. It says, "And you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you. But if you shall not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come to pass that those which you let remain of them shall be thorns in your eyes and thistles in your sides, and shall torment you in the land wherein you dwell. And it shall be that I will do to you as I thought to do to them." That's the Bible. The commentators on this say the following. First of all, Rashi. "And you shall drive out the inhabitants, and then you shall inherit it. Then you will be able to exist in it. And if you do not, you will not be able to exist in it." That's Rashi. The Sforno. "When you shall," and I use the Hebrew term is liva'eh, to eliminate. "When you shall eliminate the inhabitants of the land," I would never use such a term. I'm just telling you what he uses. "When you shall eliminate, kasher tiva'ahu, when you shall eliminate the inhabitants of the land, then you shall be privileged to inherit the land and pass it down to your children. But if you do not eliminate them, even though you will conquer the land, you will not hand it down to your children." So, Orach Chaim, another one of the great commentators. "Not only will they hold that part of the land that you did not possess, Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, but even concerning that part which you did possess and settle in, they will distress you and say, 'Rise and get out.'" It is a pleasure to deal with normal people. That is the greatness of Torah. That is the greatness of rabbis when they were rabbis. And this is the greatness of it. Now it's to the concept of the ger. But it says the strange, and brings down, I'll quote you again, the strange. It says, the Judaism that I know, pity that my 8-year-old grandson can't debate him. It's after I have gotten through with my grandson, he can debate anybody. The Judaism that I know teaches that you shall love the stranger, you shall not oppress the stranger, you shall not oppress the stranger, and so on. First of all, let us understand the Torah was not written in English. Written in Hebrew. It doesn't say stranger, it says ger. And ger is a technical term. Ger means ger. What does ger mean? First of all, even if for a moment we would assume that when it says ger, it means the non-Jewish stranger, that you should not oppress or persecute him. So that would certainly mean that if he accepts these conditions of living in Israel, in which he has no citizenship status, no political status, no national status, then by all means, we have to treat him with decency and with mercy and with respect. And then he should be treated like a Jew on equal terms in social, in his social, not meeting with him and so on, but in his social benefits, in his economic benefits, in his cultural benefits, of course, by all means. That is the mitzvah. But he isn't. He isn't a citizen. He's not equal to the Jew so that he can take the country which God said you shall live in isolation and then change it around. But more than that, it doesn't mean the stranger, the non-Jewish stranger. A ger means a non-Jew who converted. That is a ger. A ger is a ger. it is a non-Jew who converted and who is now a Jew. And he must be treated, she must be treated, they must be treated exactly as you would treat a Jew. And the chinuch, the great, one of the Rishonim, the chinuch in Commandment 63 says, and he brings down what this rabbi brought down. And you shall not oppress or persecute a ger. We are prevented from oppressing a ger even with words. And what is a ger, he says? This is one of the nations who converted and entered our faith. I don't know how much clearer you can get. He never saw the chinuch, probably. He's busy going for his PhD at Syracuse. We're playing basketball there at the stadium, at the huge
Carrier dome.
The carrier dome. The carrier dome. See that? Carrier dome. In the Torah Kohanim, in the Medrash, in the Torah Kohanim, 19, on the verse, and if a ger shall live in your land, you shall not oppress him. As an Ezrach citizen of you shall he be. The rabbis say, what does it mean as an Ezrach, as a citizen shall he be? Just as an Ezrach is one who accepted all of the Torah, so is a ger one who accepted all the Torah. I don't know how much more you have to go. It is clear to any child who learns this. The problem is this child never learned it. And then they bring down and they say, they'll bring down the following. They'll say, the Bible says, and you shall love the ger, for you are gerim in the land of Egypt. So they say, you see, there is, just as you were a ger, so this, meaning that just as you there were strangers, it's also talking about strangers. The greatest translator of the Bible was Onkelos. Onkelos was a Roman convert to Judaism. He was a convert. So listen to how he translates this, and you shall love the ger, for you are gerim. There were two, in this verse, there are two words ger and gerim. He uses two different words in Aramaic. One for ger and one for gerim. And he says as follows. He says, and you shall love the giora, meaning in Aramaic, convert to Judaism. But when in translating for you are gerim, he doesn't use the word giora, but he says for you are dayarim, you are residents in the land of Egypt. If any ger had a vested interest in having any kind of a stranger being treated properly, it was Onkelos, who was a convert. And yet he, the truth of the matter was, he said, you are speaking here of two kinds of gerim. One is a gior and one is a dayar. You shall treat the giora, the convert, properly, because you were dayarim, you were residents in the land of Egypt. And the final proof is, children who learn Chumash, children in Israel at the age of 4, my grandchildren at the age of 4 learn this. Children who learn Chumash know that the Paschal lamb, when it was sacrificed, a non-Jew was not allowed to eat from it. Indeed, if he ate from it, he was given the death penalty. Because the Paschal lamb is the symbol of Jewish freedom. No non-Jew is allowed to eat from it. That's a clear rule. Now, in Exodus 12, in Shemot 12, the Torah talks about the Paschal lamb. The Jews have to eat. And on the Paschal lamb it says, one law shall there be for you and the ger who grows in your midst. What kind of a ger can this be talking about if the Torah says that a non-Jew who eats from the Paschal lamb shall be killed? Obviously it's talking about a convert to Judaism. And wherever it says one law shall there be for you and the ger, it is talking about the convert to Judaism because God knew how, unfortunately, Jews will treat converts not in the proper way. And they say, well, he's not really Jewish. Well, of course he's Jewish, but to marry my daughter, that's a... So he said, therefore, one law shall there be for you and the convert. The convert is precisely equal to the Jew, exactly equal to the Jew. But that's the convert, not an Arab. Now, that is Judaism. That is halakha. That is as taught the proper way, the truthful way, the truthful way. You don't have to be a scholar to know that, understand? I'm a scholar, but you have to be a student of Chumash, in a couple of things in the Talmud. And and of course this is so. Of course this is the truth. The tragedy is that this rabbi here has great problems, probably, with Judaism. He has problems with Judaism. Being one who, as the Sforno said, being in countries under other people. He doesn't observe Judaism in its completeness. So he has problems with that. Because he has problems with anything which is not democracy. He's not ready to accept the fact that Western democracy is not Judaism. He goes against Judaism. So we have to be very, very careful not to be ashamed of it. Not only if the Arabs would have equal political rights, would they distort the Jewish content of the state, but they would destroy the state physically. Give them that opportunity to have equal political rights, and they'll destroy the state, and they'll liquidate the state, and they'll massacre Jews the minute that they have the power. They would make Lebanon look like kindergarten. They would make the Holocaust look like kindergarten was. In the Holocaust, these Jews went quickly. The Geshem was fairly quick. Over here will be a Holocaust of hatchets and knives. One knows Arabs. Of course, one knows Arabs. Never forget, after Black September in Jordan, a Palestinian assassinated the Jordanian foreign minister in Cairo and drank his blood on the steps. He drank his blood. That's what we're dealing with. And this yo-yo here is talking about it isn't right, it isn't ethical. Living in Syracuse in the Carrier Dome. That's the Jew and the non-Jew. That is what we are talking about. Now, to sum up this whole thing before the break, and let me just sum up, and then we'll take questions and answers on this. Then we'll have the break, the mincha and so on. And then we'll have the next session will be on Kach, what it is doing here, Israel, where it is going, and then questions and answers again. To sum up this whole thing that we had. The Jewish people is a chosen people, chosen by God at Mount Sinai, where he appeared to the entire nation, every man, woman, and child who saw it, and made a covenant permanently with the Jewish people. That they should be a people that follows his laws, and that they should be a holy nation. And if they will be that, it will be good. If not, it will be bad. God is not some kind of a Santa Claus. Don't worry to be good. The Santa Claus. There's punishment. There's a reward, there is punishment too. There's punishment too. There is evil in this world, and one has to hate evil. And at the next seminar, please God, whenever that is, we'll go into this whole concept, all these concepts, these crazy liberal concepts of what is right and what is wrong. In fact, under liberals, nothing is wrong. The Jew is a land-centered people because God wants the Jew to be separate and holy and free of, as the rabbis put it, of the abominations of the nations. The abominations. And for that reason, therefore, the Jews should all live in Israel, and for that reason, non-Jews who want to live there must be limited to their personal rights and no political and no national rights. And that is the Jewish idea, and there is halacha, and you've been given here a great many sources. You can have smicha, at least in this area. Believe me, from this, if you took notes, and if you remembered it, you'll be able to give a real good shiur in any synagogue on this. All right, are there any questions? But just stick to this area and not to anything else. Yes.
Can I make an announcement about tonight's meeting?
Yes, you certainly can.
The rabbis will speak tonight in New Jersey in Bergenfield.
Please go.
And please God, and we hope to have a good turnout. But if anybody here would like to join us, it's just a few miles, about 4 or 5 miles over the George Washington Bridge. We have flyers in the back. And if you want to have directions how to get there, you can speak to me or to that young lady whom I've given the directions to already.
Yes.
One can argue against your use of the psukim. I believe in Gemara Avodah Zarah Daf Chaf, the Gemara says, "Lo Kahane Lo Chanina Makavra," and Tosfos says that it is applied to the Sheva Amim, even though he says to destroy them all. It is applied to them not during war. If we're not at war with them, that would apply to the Lo Chanina Makavra would apply to them. Not during war.
Certainly, of course.
So he was restricting the law of Lo Kahane only to Sheva Amim and not to be extended from there.
Certainly, because if there's a question of Lo Kahane, it means that under no circumstances could they live inside the land. What I said was that they may indeed live in the land, given these conditions. Given these conditions, they most certainly can. Though I will tell you this, that there is big machloket Rashi and Tosfos in whether the 7 nations, even if they wanted to accept these things, with these conditions, were allowed to stay. Tosfos says yes. Rashi says no. The Ramban apparently in the Chumash in Dvarim says that there is no such a difference between the 7 nations and other nations. If they accept the conditions, then they too could stay. So he says then what is the difference between the 7 nations and other nations? The difference is that if they did not accept it, the 7 nations must be totally wiped out, and other nations only the males and so on, the adult males. So certainly this is so. You're right. Even though I must tell you that there are people that don't hold like Tosfos either. Otechane is only talking about the question of, are they allowed, for example, to own land? Or they allowed to own a house? And in the Shulchan Aruch, I do want you to know, he does not paskin like Tosfos. He says that any akum, and here is a question where it says akum, whether he really meant only akum or because of the censor he put in akum, any akum. He paskin there that any akum is not allowed to own land in Israel. And there's no question about whether to rent him a house. I mean, just know that is the Shulchan Aruch. The thing is this, that we all know that the Shulchan Aruch always only brings down laws that are applicable in our time. In the Shulchan Aruch, there's nothing about sacrifice, anything which is not applicable in our time. So if he brought this down, you know he is not speaking about Canaanim. He must be speaking about nations in our time. So that's also something which is somewhat, yes.
I believe this is related. Why did the Supreme Court in Israel find this to be racist?
That's not related. That will be at the second thing. You can ask it then. Let's not go into anything which involves kach. This is just the substantive questions here. Later, you can ask that question. It's a good question. It's probably one of the most basic questions possible because the answer to that question says almost everything about the state of Israel. Yes.
In the book of Joshua, don't we learn that that Joshua accepted part of one of the nations?
Yes.
To basically, and he went to war to protect them.
He accepted them as permanent slaves. As permanent slaves.
And they agreed to that.
They had very little choice.
Right, it was either death or they agreed.
That's right. They had very little choice. I mean, he was a great salesman. Great pitcher. Very little choice. Yes. Yeah.
If I give these arguments to people in defense of the policy of
Yes.
transferring the Arabs, they can say to me, well, that's very easy for you to say from New York because you're not going to have to suffer the consequences.
Tell him I'm speaking for Kahane. And he's there. That's all. You say, I'm telling you what Kahane says, okay? And he's there. And his children are there and his grandchildren. And tell him, you're right. I'm not there. And you're not there either to tell us not to throw out the Arabs who would massacre Kahane. Maybe they want that. No, that's a bad thing. A bad thing. Don't say Kahane. Say someone else. Yeah.
Your comment about the type of Holocaust that takes place if the Arabs have their way
Yes.
is borne out only last week. I read a report in Lebanon. The Amal and the Hezbollah went to a village and they massacred every man, woman and child with hatchets and knives to take photos.
Yes, that's true. There are over 180 people massacred. That's how it is. I'm not surprised by that. What Jews should talk about is where were all the Jewish liberals who were in sovereign Shatila when Jews didn't kill anybody? They simply didn't stop Christians from massacring. How come there is no outcry now? That says a great deal more about Jewish liberals and leftists than about Amal. Believe me. Quiet neighborhood over. Yes.
Jews had suffered galut as a punishment.
Yes.
And before each time that they returned, because the Nevi'im was saying this is the time that we have to return to Israel.
Right.
So I don't think the Nevi'im will say right now.
No. That's not true. That's not true. It's not true. Not true. First of all, it's not each time. There have only been two exiles. What do you mean each time? The first one, it was a specific time given, 70 years. And that's what it says in Yirmiyahu. God says to Yirmiyahu, 70 years, and that's it. At the end of 70, he went back. The second exile, the one which we are now, no time was given. Because there are no prophets there. There are no prophets. There are only lawsuits. There are no prophets there. There are no prophets there. There are no prophets there. And the Talmud tells us that that the redemption can come in one of two ways. B'ita or Achishen. B'ita in its time, meaning that there will be a certain time that we don't know, but there will be a certain fixed time, or Achishena Harid. And the Talmud says in Sanhedrin that Zachu Achishena, lo Zachu B'ita. If the Jew merits it, if he deserves it, if he's worthy of it, he can come instantly, today. Lo Zachu, if he doesn't merit it, then it will come B'ita in its time. That's why Akiva believed that Bar Kokhba was the Mashiach. Akiva was a man, not a fanatic, hot-headed Kachnik, great rabbi. 65 years after the temple was destroyed. He already believed that it was possible for the Messiah to come. How? Because there is no fixed time in this period. It can come soon. In other words, there is a maximum time when it must come. But it can come much, much, much sooner. The Mashiach could have come at any time from the time of the destruction of the temple had we been worthy of it. And indeed, Bar Kokhba came mighty, mighty close. He drove out the Romans from the land. He drove out the Romans. And then, he said, he was overcome with his own strength and self-importance. And he said in his prayer to God, if you don't want to help me, don't help me. Just don't help the Romans. When Akiva heard that, he took his army. And by the way, the bulk of the army of Kofa were the students of Akiva. He told them to shut the Gemara and go fight. That's what the Gemara says. When Akiva heard that, he said, this is not the Messiah. We cannot win, and it's all over. But he did believe that. He did believe that he was the Messiah. And how could he believe that if, as you said, there has to be some prophet to tell us? Because that is not true. There is no prophet. There has been no prophecy already since the very early days of the Second Temple. The last three prophets were in the early days of the Second Temple, and since then there was no prophecy, there was no bat kol, there was no voice from heaven, there was no ruach hakodesh. Even though people will say that this Rebbe has ruach hakodesh, that's not true. No one has ruach hakodesh. No one has, and someone who says that someone has flies against the Talmud. We have what we have. The Dalet Amot Shel Halacha, the 4 cubits of Halacha. That's what the Talmud says. In the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, God has only the 4 cubits of Halacha. That's how we know what is true. You sit and you learn. Yes?
How come in Yirmiyahu, when they went through the first Galas, he says you should banu lobatim, so you should build houses, right. You should open up a business, you should open up yeshivas, because this is going to be a permanent type of...
He didn't say permanent, he said...
And put it this way, when Ezra went back 70 years later, he just had a couple of followings. The majority of everybody stayed in Babel, and that's where the Bavli and everything, the biggest Talmidei Chachamim came from Babel at that time.
True. First of all, he didn't say stay there.
No, he said, well, yeah, okay.
He said, don't try to go back before the 70 years because God said 70 years. That's it. But he didn't say to stay there permanently. Not at all.
So why would he say, he said, establish yourself.
Because
this is not a temporary.
Try living for 70 years with no hope. What are you talking about? What he was saying was, don't think I can come back earlier. You're going to be there for 70 years. So build the houses because 70...
So how come they all stayed there after the 70
that's a different story.
years?
That's a different story. How come the Jews didn't want to leave Mitzrayim? How come the Jews didn't want to leave Egypt? How come it was the Gedolim who were the spies and who said, we can't make it, too many giants, and we had grasshoppers, and we had giants, and everything else, let's go back. So the Talmud tells us, the Gemara in Yuma, Daf Tet, Yuma, says the following: Rabbi Bar-Chana, who was one of the rabbis from Babylon, from Babel, came to Eretz Israel to learn Torah, and he saw Resh Lakish, who was one of the great scholars in Eretz Israel, bathing in the Jordan. So he put out his hand to help him get out. And Resh Lakish didn't take his hand, and he said, how I hate the Jews of Babylon. Had you gone back to the time of Ezra, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, would return permanently. But because you didn't go back, that's why there was a destruction of the second temple. They sinned. Absolutely so. And the Kuzari is one, by the way, the Kuzari is, the Vilna Gaon once said that if he had to be in a place with only one sefer, with only one book, he would pick the Kuzari. Kuzari is one of the great books of Jewish thought. Yehuda Halevi wrote it. And in it, if you know the Kuzari, and we'll finish now. And Kuzari, the story of the Kuzari, in the Middle Ages, there was a nation called the Kuzari, the Khazars, who lived in what is now the Crimea in the Soviet Union. And the king apparently was a philosopher king. And they were a pagan people. And he wasn't happy with paganism. So he invited representatives of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism to come to his court. And he asked them questions. And he was impressed by the Jews, and he converted the entire people, the whole nation, converted to Judaism. The kingdom was eventually captured by the Russians, and most of them were either killed or scattered. Though undoubtedly many of them fled to what is now Eastern Europe, and many Jews are descended of them. They were Jewish. Yehuda Halevi decided to take this story and make an historical fiction of philosophy. And he put the king and the rabbi. The king would ask questions and the rabbi would answer. And of course, in effect, he was posing questions about Judaism and answering through the rabbi's mouth. And obviously, each question, the rabbi bats home run. Oh, it's like batting practice. Question, bingo. Until one question he puts into the king's mouth. He has just finished praising the land of Israel. And the king turns to me and says, I see hypocrisy. If Eretz Israel is such a great mitzvah, so how come the Jews don't go there? And Yehuda Halevi puts in the mouth of the rabbi, Hovishtani Hamelech. You have shamed me, O king. Hovishtani. It's busha, you have shamed me. You're right. And he then, in essence, quotes this Gemara in Yuma. Had the Jews gone back, the Messiah would have come then, and so on and so on. But they didn't come back, and they preferred to stay in Bavel there, he says, with their homes and their iskayhem and their businesses. You're right. They should have come back. The losers came back.
But they had plenty of Nevi'im at that time too, who didn't say anything. You don't find
not true at all.
The Nevi'im was the
first of all,
was in the court there.
First of all, the Nevi'im lived at a time when they couldn't go back yet. He was already old when Mordechai went back. The Gemara tells us Mordechai went back. Ezra went back. Nehemiah went back. They went back. Obviously, they left behind all these people. You can't simply leave behind Jews. Jews need rabbis. This was the tragedy. This was the tragedy. Okay, let's take a break. It's now 2:34. We'll take a break until about 5 to 3, and then we'll continue the next. Okay, and Mincha, this is a very good time for Mincha, for those people who daven Mincha, for those people that don't daven Mincha. Okay, we have in this next session the general theme will be Kach and what it is doing and what it plans to do, and we'll leave a good amount of time for question and answers. Okay. clearly, Kach is now at a crossroads. I think let me give you a little background of Kach from the time that it began, because many people really don't know how Kach began and what it underwent. I think it's very important to know events of the past, so that one, I think it gives heart to people to see how Kach grew. Kach ran for the first time for election in 1973, and at that time we failed by 1,200 votes to get into the Knesset. Extremely close election. We got 0.9% of the vote when you need 1% to make the Knesset. It was a real heartbreaking thing, and of course it was stolen from us blind, because we had a total of perhaps 300 poll watchers out of, at that time, 6,000. They stole his blood. Already then, we raised the issue of the Arabs, and the transfer of the Arabs. I think it's important to, of course, realize that I was extremely popular in Israel when I made Aliyah in 1971. JDL had a very, very tremendous name in Israel. In general, people like us for things that we do elsewhere. And in Israel, there was a great pride that he was a Jewish group standing up, tough, and doing all the things. And there were editorials for me and articles for me. It was a tremendous thing. I mean, when I came to Israel, in fact, within 2 weeks, the Likud, which at that time was called Gachal, met with me, and they offered me a safe seat in their list if I were to run. Of course, I said, well, if I ran, would I be allowed to say what I feel? I said, there's party discipline, there's a party platform, and you can't just say what you want, which is of course true. So I said, okay, I don't want to run. Forget it. I'm not here. The government, of course, was already, the Labor government, at that time was a Labor government, was already against me because of the Soviet Jewish issue. And for whatever their reasons, there was a special cabinet session which condemned the JDL for its violence and so on, which led to a tremendous counter-offensive on the part of many people in Israel. In fact, there was a special press conference of some of the leading Soviet Jewish activists at that time, Sperling and Kazakov and other people. And they said at the press conference, and I have the news on that, the reason why we are in Israel is because of Kahane. Well, naturally so. That's how things were. After the 1973 campaign, I spoke at the University of Haifa. At that time, I was still allowed to speak. And I spoke about the need to remove the Arabs. Well, that's when the first change began. The cabinet held a special meeting to state that I was not speaking for the government. As if I was saying that I was speaking for the government. And I remember that Friday, all the weekend papers come out, of course, Friday there. That Friday, all the papers, I mean, top to bottom, right and left, attacked the idea. I mean, bitterly attacked the idea. Bitterly attacked the idea. It's insanity and so on. It isn't moral, it isn't ethical, it isn't this. The years that followed were years of many arrests. Many arrests. In Israel, they can arrest you for no reason. And you can be held for 48 hours. and then free. Or you can be held for 40 hours and then charged. Or you can be held for 40 hours and then you come to the judge and say, we have here secret information which we ask you not to show the defendant. And then they ask that you be held for up to 15 days more. And usually this so-called secret information is a captain in the police writes to the sergeant, we have reason to believe that Kahane is going to bomb Shamir's over. And the judge was, really? In the meantime, you don't know what they're all going on clucking about. That's weird, because there was no habeas corpus in this. There's no habeas corpus. And these were years of, they raided our office, seized our files, I was arrested every 2 weeks, just like that. So I got used to knowing that at 10:30, if I heard footsteps on the stairs, I know that I had a special bag packed. I already learned what one needed in the lockup, and so on. And so that's how the thing went. We had no members. We had members, but very, very, very few members, because members were afraid. They were afraid to get arrested. A lot of supporters. Very, very few members. No money. So in the 1977 election, we ran and were decisively defeated. I mean, we lost. I tell you, it was, when we do things, we do well. We really lost. I mean, it was a pretty stunning defeat. We got about 4,000 votes. It was pretty bad. That was of course the year that Menachem Begin won the election. So that also played a very, very, very great part in our lack of votes. Things got much, much worse, and things oddly enough got worse under Begin. And I was arrested several times, and this time not for the lockup. This time I was arrested once for 5 months, once for 3 months, once for 31 days, and solitary, and so on. And Kach, oddly enough, I mean, we didn't realize it, but Kach was making its impact. It's hard to realize, and therefore, I think from that, when you argue, or when you hand out flyers, or when you do these things, it may appear to you that you're not getting anything. That's not true. That's not true. You have no idea what a flyer does. You have no idea. You go to a dinner, and you hand out flyers there, and 500 people are sitting around waiting for dessert and reading it. And half of them are thinking to themselves, right, right. They're not going to say it. They're thinking to themselves. And you've made an impact here. You have sown a seed. You've sown a seed. Don't think that you have to wait for someone to jump and say, you're right. Not true. People don't do that. People don't do that. People read things carefully and slowly, and they become closet supporters, which is okay. The more people in the closet, the better. And they were difficult times. We kept talking about the Arab issue, and they kept calling us racist and so on. We also were the first ones to seize houses in Hebron. We seized Beit Hadassah in 1976, and I was arrested for that. And then we seized it again in 77, Purim time, and there was gas on us. There was tear gas on us. And we arrested again. And then I was served with an order barring me from Hebron. I wasn't allowed to leave Hebron in 1978, and I tore it up, and I entered Hebron, and I went to jail for 3 months. But in the meantime, things were moving, and we didn't even realize it. Things were moving. Then in 1980, of course, I was arrested for 9 months on administrative arrest, in which there was no charge and there was no trial. And And that was, of course, I must say, a bit of a shock. That was the first time that any Jew had ever been arrested under that kind of order. And that was really a shock. I remember I was surprised. I told the police that came, I said, "Who's arrested? Jewish," and they were shaking. I mean, you could see them shaking by it. In any case, I was there for 9 months in Kelly Romney, in Romney prison. And in the meantime, the Yamit thing began. And we went to Yamit, and Kach made a tremendous name for itself in Yamit. We were the ones there were 48 bunkers there. And we said to the people that were running it and were vowing never to leave, we said, "What are you, crazy? If you stay in the houses, then they're going to come and knock on the houses. Let's go into the bunkers." 48 bunkers. Hard to knock down bunkers. I mean, these were solid walls. Of course, they didn't want to take the bunker, so we seized one bunker, and sure enough, we were the last ones out. We were the last ones. They knocked down everything except this bunker. It took them days they finally drilled this huge hole with a huge drill, incredible. It was like some dentist drill. Huge drill. And then they pumped water into it. And then they sent in the anti-terror squad, the elite squad, and that was that. But Kach, without our knowing it, was gaining a tremendous name in many ways. One, that these guys are Gvarim, and they're men. In Israel, the greatest compliment is they're gevers. He's a man. It's a macho country. They're gevers. They're gevers. Geverata. You know. So one thing, a gever, and secondly, we got a reputation which in Israel is a rare thing: honest people. An honest person in Israel is a rarity, like a Diogenes. One goes around with a lantern looking for an honest man. We had a name as an honest party that simply did not compromise. Anshe Emet, people who were truth, didn't compromise. And that, you'll see, eventually served us in good stead. So we ran in 81, again, having lost twice, and this time we lost again. This time we did a little better. A little better, which is a surprise for a loser to do better. A little better. And then finally in 84, we ran and we won. To the shock and the dismay, you had to be in Israel election night to see this. It was, they were supposed to give the projections, the final projections of the results at 10 p.m. And at 10 p.m., the announcer comes on television, and you see, he really does look pale. I mean, he really looked pale. And he said there will be a slight delay. We're rechecking him. And I said to people, we want to see it. We want to see it. We want to see it. That's why this thing is. It came on about 20 minutes later, and he really looked sick. The whole list he said, this, and at the very end he said, it would appear that Kahane has at least one seat. At least one seat. Now I know we eventually later I knew we had won a second seat for sure, and they robbed that. That was two. We only lost by 4,000 for the second seat. And we really didn't have, we had barely 10% of the polling places. Of 8,000, we had only about 800 polling places. Nevertheless, we won a seat. For the next hour on Israel TV, nobody spoke about it. Cool, right? Everybody was babbling about it. It can't be. But indeed, it was. So the lesson from that is, you never stop trying. We were 3-time losers, the 4th time we won. You never stop trying, and above all, you don't change your platform in order to win. We did not change anything We kept the platform, despite all the advice of all my friends and so on. And I recall very, very, very well, when I lost in 1977, I was walking in the street, I was pretty much down, and I met Dr. Yosef Burg of the NRP. And they had just won 12 seats, which was their absolute maximum at the time. 12 seats they won, and he was in an expansive mood. So he saw me and he took me around and he said, Kahane, your problem is you're not a politician. You have to learn how to. And naturally, eventually they dropped to 5 seats, and had we run, we would have 10 seats without changing anything. Without changing anything. Without changing a word. We kept the same exact plan. In the 4 years that followed, we went every night to rallies. Now, you have to realize that nobody in Israel does that. Knesset time, they go to rallies and so on, and they hold rallies in the center of town. We went into every little hole that was never visited by a Knesset member. Every development town, every shchuna, every neighborhood. People never went to shchuna. Begin never went to a shchuna. They went into the kikar, the center of the town, they spoke there. We went into every little neighborhood. And people appreciated it. They're coming to us. They're coming to us. And eventually, what happened was, these rallies turned into love fests. I mean, love. You know what love is? It was incredible. Because we were saying the things that everybody was thinking. Now that line in our speech was always the line that always brought the most, right. When I would say, אני אומר מה שאתם חושבים. I say what you think. It's true. It was true. It was true. Our support at that time was still overwhelmingly from Sephardic Jews. Overwhelmingly from Sephardic Jews. But you began to see already an interesting change. An unprecedented thing. A religious party suddenly getting huge amounts of non-religious votes. Now, in Israel, that does not happen. Half a religious person never voted for Agudat Yisrael. Or Mavdal. They don't do that. The only non-Orthodox Jews that vote for Mavdal are Arabs. And it isn't a joke. It's a joke. They go out and they bribe. All the parties bribe. All these Zionist parties get votes in Arab religion. They bribe them. It's that simple. And we began, of course, we were met already with a boycott. Won the election in August 84, the state authority, the state broadcasting authority, put out a policy statement that Kahane would not be allowed to appear on television and radio. And Navon, the minister of Education, announced that I would not be allowed to appear in schools. And the university presidents met to announce that I would not be allowed to appear on campuses. So, what we did therefore was, we decided to go to the people. And that's what these rallies were. Now, you have to bear in mind that 2 rallies a night add up to a lot of rallies in a month, in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, in 4 years. I mean, I shook the hands of well over 100,000 people. That's a tremendous thing. Now, nobody in Israel ever did that before. And while there was a total boycott on these things, the Minister of Police, Ralev, had on his desk every morning a report on how many people appeared at Kahane's rallies the previous night. And he issued a statement finally saying, it's an unbelievable thing. He says, this is a tremendous danger. He says, tens of thousands of people show up. So for a while they tried to hold up our permits. You cannot hold a rally in Israel, unlike here. Over here, you want to hold a rally, hold a rally. In Israel, you need a police permit. And you have to give 5 days notice before, and you have to do all kinds of things. And then suddenly they would start saying, we have to bring an ambulance and fire equipment in case there's... In case we, of course, showed up without the ambulance, and they broke up the rally, and we called the police, and finally they, for some reason, gave in eventually. And we started to gain and gain and gain and gain. That's what led to the call for an anti-racist bill. And eventually the anti-racist bill was passed. Nevertheless, with an amendment which we were convinced would save us. The amendment was under pressure of the Orthodox parties who got frightened. If you're going to ban Kahane, next is us. So they insisted on an amendment, which stated that anyone who bases his words or his writings upon sifrei dat, any books of faith, religious books, or to preserve the pulchan dat, the ritual of dat, religion, not be deemed racist. It was great, tremendous. I voted for the bill. I voted for the bill. I'm all for that. Because everything that we said was based on that. So, election time came in '88. Despite what was clear to the press, all these huge crowds coming out. And nevertheless, the official polls showed me with 1 to 2 seats. So, Chadashot, which is one of the afternoon papers, it's kind of a maverick paper. It hates me anyhow, but it's a maverick paper against the establishment. They decided something's wrong here. Something is wrong here. There's all these people coming out with 1 to 2 seats. There's something wrong here. So they decided not to have polls. They're not going to ask people for whom to vote, because they suspected that on the one hand, people who were going to vote Kach were afraid to tell it to a stranger. And on the other hand, there was some hanky-panky with the actual posters. So they decided to do something else. They decided to place an actual ballot box in a different city every single week, and have people vote. There'll be actual ballots of all the parties, and have them vote. This way, nobody sees nobody's in what. And he said, "Let's see that." And in city after city, whether it was a Likud city, a Labour city, we began to get 8%, 9%, 12%, 15%. And they used to, after every single Friday, they would publish the results. And they'd say, it's a disease. It's spreading everywhere. Stop them quickly. Eventually, after 12 weeks, we were averaging 10.2%. Now that is just a little over 12 seats. 10.2% in their polls. It wasn't a scientific poll. Nevertheless, if we talk about 12 seats, so it's not a scientific, so it's 8 seats. In the end, we of course saw that it would have been closer to the 12 seats than the 8 seats. And of course, when we ran, so then a headline story sort of broke that Shamir and Peres had met and decided to get together and ban Kach. Of course, furor and uproar over it. And then they released a poll, a private poll of Likud, which showed us getting 7 seats in their poll. And a private poll of Labour, which showed us getting 8 seats. And among the 8 seats, 3 seats from Labour voters. Kahane Eta. And so it was decided that they would ban us. And I don't want to go into a long story. We were banned. Now, the question was asked before, how could the High Court ban it? It says. It says. Sue. Sue. The High Court was determined to ban us. What we were to them was the most dangerous threat to their sanity as Westernized Jews. The most dangerous things imaginable. On the day that they banned us, and they did not ban the pro-PLO party, so people were upset. There's nothing to be, there's nothing strange about that. That party in no way threatened them. That party in no way threatened them. It was a party which, it's a PLO party and so on. We threatened them with our ideology. We were going on talking about the contradiction between Western democracy and Judaism and Zionism and so on. It was a tremendous fear for them. That's why it was a unanimous vote, including one judge who was a religious judge. Menachem Elo, a religious judge, who joined in stating that that some of my bills, which went to ban intermarriage, was similar to the Nuremberg laws. For a religious Jew to say that is unbelievable. We presented some 400 pages of documented sources in Judaism for everything that we said. They didn't even look at it. They didn't even look at it. Because they were determined to ban us for a threat to their sanity. To their sanity. To their psychological stability as democratic Jews. As Western culturalized Jews. So that's where we stand. We're banned. The Koch party was banned from running. Since then, of course, we obviously didn't stop having rallies. And our rallies are just as big, if not bigger, than ever before. And our support is certainly greater than ever before. Because added to those people that really backed us, a large number of people who were really furious at what was done. Really, really angry. So the support is out there. The question arises, what do we intend doing? Do we plan to run again or not to run again? But first of all, before I get into that, I just want to touch briefly on the Koch project for a second state. And this is, of course, the new flag. This is the flag, and you can see that it was done with a purpose. The menorah is supposed to represent that this state will not only be a state of Jews, but a much more Jewish state. That's Judaism. The lion, of course, is the symbol of Judah. That was the symbol. Every tribe had its own symbol, and the lion was the lion of Judah. And that is the verse in the Torah, Gur al Yehuda, Judah is a young lion. That's the verse from the Torah. And we thought it important to bring on the flag a verse from the Torah, so as to bring it together. Now, a week ago Wednesday, 10 days ago, the first Congress for the Jewish state of Yehuda was held. Originally it was to have been held at in Kiryat Arba, but the army banned us. The army put pressure upon the local council, and even though we have two members on that council, but it was voted 7-2 to have the thing banned. And so it was held at the Sheraton Plaza in Jerusalem. And I must say, it really was, it was a classy, it was really a classy thing. We did not let the Sheraton Plaza down. We performed up to their expectations. It was really first of all, the place was packed. It was an army of news people there, an army, which only makes it more incredible at the blackout of the event that was in this country. there was CBS, and there was NBC, and there was ABC, and there was CNN, and there was Time, and there was Newsweek, and there was everything you can imagine. It was there was BBC in French and Japanese. Everything was there. And more important, we managed to get delegates from a quarter of the settlements, which is much more difficult than that sounds, because they were being threatened, first of all, by the police. The Attorney General, Harish, immediately stated, as soon as we announced this plan, that he was looking into whether this was incitement to mutiny. So obviously, if you're an old-time Kach person, I mean, anytime the Attorney General makes such an asinine statement, so you want him. That's but if you've never been arrested, so the thought of being arrested is a little bit frightening. So people were afraid, and people did cancel, and so nevertheless, we managed to get a quarter of the settlements there, which was good. The other reason why it was difficult was because the leaders of Gush and Munim all came out against it. Obvious reason, because they didn't think of it. So, and this is a tremendous tragedy. So even if they were against it, be quiet. After we're fighting for you, we're on the same side. Why must you attack it? That's the way it is. If you want to know why the Second Temple was destroyed, that's exactly why. Jews incapable of being together even when they're on the same side. Because the question is, but I want to be the boss. Now, not that we invited them all to participate. We sent letters to every Gush and Munim leader, all of them. Come on in. It's not a Kach project. We thought it out. So we're pushing it, but come on in. Nobody can. Nobody can. It was a huge success at the Congress. What we did was we first elected a provisional assembly for the new state and an executive. We did not declare the state. We declared our intention of declaring the state if the state of Israel will decide to move out of the territories. But in the meantime, we are creating the whole infrastructure of a state, so that it'll be ready. Everything will be set in place to be put into effect. If God forbid, we need it. And of course, our major purpose is not to create a state. Our major purpose is to pressure Israel into annexing the territories. We don't want two states. We want one state over all of Eretz Israel. But if there won't be one state, then there will be two Jewish states to guarantee that there will never be one Palestinian state. It got a tremendous amount of positive coverage in the settlements, even among voters for Tchiyah and so on and so forth. Because somebody was doing something. Now, I want you to know that we came up with this idea in 1975. I saw in 1975 the possibility of giving up the territories, and I said, then let's start now. But as with all things, an idea has to have a time, the proper time, and it wasn't the proper time. People couldn't see it. They couldn't see it. What can you do? More and more people saw it now. Plus, now there was a Kach movement, and now we had a little money and a lot of people, and so it's come into right now, and from now on, there's been nothing of great drama. We are busily creating the infrastructure of a state. A census, which will lead to an election within six months, and the election of a permanent assembly and a permanent executive, and the establishment of shadow ministries, finance, and all the rest. All the rest. We are creating the infrastructure, including defense. Now, defense, of course, is the most sensitive area because we have to be extremely careful with that. That's what the left is looking for. So clearly, there will be no confrontation with the Israeli army ever. That's what they want. No confrontation. No confrontation. But every settler has a weapon. And therefore we will build, just as the Haganah built the semi-paramilitary force under the British, we'll build this, everything is legal. The weapons are all legal for defense. And we'll slowly build this paramilitary group to be ready if Israel should decide to leave. The question of, well, won't the army try and drag out the Jews? There's a tremendous difference between Yamit and Judea and Samaria. Tremendous difference in many, many ways. First of all, in all of the Sinai, there were less than 3,000 Jews. And the other Jews could not get there. It was far away. There were only 2 roads leading there, and both roads were blocked by the army. Judea and Samaria already has 65,000 people living in it, plus that it is surrounded by Israel. And 100,000 Jews will pour into that area to make sure that it's not given up. Just physically impossible for the army to pick up 150,000 people. Nobody is going to fight the army. They simply won't go. You won't go. The army, who knows how many people it takes to pick up one person that doesn't want to go? To pick up 150,000 people, you need God knows how many soldiers. And furthermore, when they pick them up and they bring them across the green line and go back, the person picks himself up and goes back again. So that's why the government is so tremendously worried about this. So that's the state of Judea. Second thing, and this is the most important thing, and this I want you to listen to very, very carefully. Very, very carefully. Can Kach run again? I don't know. We'll make the necessary changes, the name, and so on and so forth. But dealing with the mafia, who knows? Who knows? We may make every change possible. Say, doesn't matter. It's the same group. No one, if there was law and order, good. We know what the law is. There is no law. There is no law. Whatever the judges think, that's it. So I don't know. We, of course, will make the necessary efforts and everything and so on. But I want to tell you this carefully and listen carefully to this. The state of Israel is in a state of immense collapse at this moment. The country is falling apart. And the government is preparing to make deep concessions. The release yesterday of this terrorist is a collapse before pressure. Faisal Husseini is not some moderate Arab. He is one of the leading members of the PLO, and this pressure to free him has been going on for months and months and months, and he has been freed. And Rabin stated, I'm freeing him in the hope. What does Rabin, when he says Krishma every single night before going to sleep, what does he hope? And he says, in the hope that he will persuade the Palestinians to hold elections on the West Bank. I sit there hoping that the man dies before he can do that. Shamir has agreed to elections on the West Bank. Do you understand what that means? Do you begin to understand what that means? Let's assume that the Arabs will agree to it. And believe me, our only hope now is the Arabs. That they say no. That's our only hope. Our only hope. The only hope of saving the Jewish people is the Arabs. Our only hope. That they'll say no on the question of principle. Hopefully. On the other hand, they may get smart. If they vote, the PLO will sweep every single city. Will sweep every single city. The PLO clearly represents the Palestinians, of course. What will be then, the PLO and the whole world will then get up and say, all right, Israel, you sponsor the election. You allow the election. There were free elections, and the PLO won. The PLO, so you have to speak to them. And these are people who aren't, this is an Arafat, these are people who are indigenous to the territory. What can Shamir say then? What can this little dwarf say? Mind-boggling. He has also agreed already to an international conference under the auspices of the UN. For 3 years, Schultz kept flying to Israel, and Shamir kept sending him back to Mrs. Schultz. No, never, 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 never. And suddenly, yes. Of course they're giving in. Of course they're giving in. What I said at the speech last time, a week ago Thursday, when Moshe Aaron spoke to the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Knesset and said, we don't necessarily hold to long-standing positions. We are not a stone wall. Well, everybody heard what he was saying. Everybody heard what he was saying. What is he talking about? Long-standing positions. We know what that means. An opposition to this, an opposition to that. It's not necessarily so. And Shamir said essentially the same thing in speaking to soldiers the same day in Shechem. He said we'll have to find a way between what our heart desires and what our head tells us we have to do. Suddenly you have to do. For years and years and years you were saying nobody tells us. And suddenly, yes. They are preparing concessions. And the country is falling apart. And you have a growing number of people inside Israel who are diseased minds. And when a person can get up in Israel and say that we have to prepare the glass cages in which we will sit when they put us on trial for what we did to the Palestinians, this man is sick, he's diseased, but when he is cheered, you know that he is joined by a whole host of diseases. And when the next day is put on television so that he can say it again, so that more people can hear it, and on radio so that even more people can hear it, then you know that the country is diseased. You have a group such as Yesh Gvul, which hands out booklets to soldiers telling them how to avoid the army. How they don't have to serve beyond the green line. You understand what is happening there? The country is falling apart. And it's Shamir's fault. It isn't the left. He allows this intifada to go on for 15 months. What does he expect? This poor soldier, he doesn't know what he's doing, why he's here. He isn't allowed to put it down. His hands are tied. So he has to beat up and shoot every single day, and he doesn't want to. Of course it's Shamir's fault, and the Likud's fault, and Paris' fault, certainly. And so people really feel guilty. And so that's why more and more people are just dying to run away from Israel. They want to leave Israel. Hundreds of thousands want to leave Israel. They want to get away. They want to flee the country. The country is falling apart. So now try and understand why. You know, God does things in His own way. And I thought to myself, why were we there? Of course you had the evil ring there. Why did God allow us to go there? Maybe we didn't deserve it. That's a reason. And maybe there was a better reason. Think about it carefully. Maybe God saved us from our own delusions and saved us for the Jewish people. What would have happened had we run? We would have won 10 seats, 11 seats, 12 seats. And we would cheer. We were the third largest party in the Knesset. What would have happened next? The Likud and Labour would have gotten together. This time, immediately. Not in 51 days, in 1 day. Stop Kahane. So we would be in the Knesset, 10, 12 seats. frustrated. And they would this time stay together for 4 years. This would be the kind of unhappy wedlock that is really, really locked. They would stay for 4 years. You know what they can do to Israel in 4 years? And let's say that Israel would still be, weaving and wobbly after 4 years, and we ran again, and we got this time 30 seats, because the people saying, rock on 30 seats, 35 seats. They'd get together again. Therefore, I want to tell you, the only hope of Israel is to somehow put an end to this whole system and have a strong government take over. Now listen carefully. Obviously, the answer is for the people to get up and overthrow the government. But you don't say that. For 2 reasons. One, they won't do it. Secondly, if you think I sat for a long time in 1980, wait till you see this. So you don't say that. And I never. I haven't said it. I haven't said it. You don't say that. You don't say that. But what you do is, you begin to put it subtly into the minds of the people. Under the slogan, take your fate in your own hands, which can mean anything. We are going to demand, now we won't get it yet, but we're going to demand a referendum. We're going around and signing up hundreds of thousands of people for a referendum, which will call for the dispersal of the Knesset and elections within 30 days, in which groups that run must be committed to a platform of 5 basic points. 1, the putting down of the Intifada immediately with every means necessary. 2, the annexation of the territories, so that we will put an end to this nonsense that there are only 2 choices, a Palestinian state or a continuation of the occupation. There are not 2 choices, there are 3 choices. The third choice is a just choice, a Jewish choice, a Jewish state there. Israel, not Judea, Israel. 3, a choice given to all Arabs to remain in the country with personal rights and no political rights, or leave the country. 4, a total change in the economic system, free enterprise, tear down the Histadrut, make it a trade union only. That is its function. Sell off Kur and Solil Boneh and Eged and all the rest. And bring in free enterprise, capitalism, bring in private capital. Let the country become normal again. Throw the bureaucrats into the sea one by one. And 5, a basic change in the educational system of Israel, to give young Jews the kind of Jewish pride and Jewish knowledge, Judaism, Zionism, that they lack totally today. Any group that is willing to run and accept those platforms and promise to implement them will run. In the election, one party wins, no coalitions. One party wins. The leading party gets the government, and it gets the government for 4 years. Now, for 4 years, nobody can do whatever you want. 4 years, implement this program. In World War II, 1939 to 1945, 6 years, Britain froze democracy. There were no elections in Great Britain for 6 years. Because there was a crisis, and Churchill said, what kind of election? What are you, crazy? Hitler's bombing, Hitler's this and so on. What kind of elections? 6 years, there were no elections. That's what Israel needs. Now, no one here is calling for an overthrow of the government. What we are calling for is the people to go and vote. and decide. We want them to go to a referendum. We're the people. We are the ultimate authority in this country. We want to forget the Knesset on this issue. We want to go back to Vermont or Athens. The people are going to vote. No more on this issue. No delegates. No representatives. We personally want to vote on this. If it should go through, well, it'll save Israel. Less than that, nothing is going to save the country. This mafia there has the country by the throat. They'll never let us run. They'll never let us run. In Yediot last week, there was a news item about the Mossad had been planning to shoot me several months ago when I was still running. No question about it. These are people who are capable of doing anything. Anything. They have done it already. People who turned over Jews to the British. People who shot Jews out the Lena. People who did what they did to Sephardic Jews. They're capable of, people who kidnapped Yemenite Jews. They're capable of doing anything. Anything at all. That's why this is the only hope of Israel. Now we have to do this cleverly, and we have to do this smartly, but this is the only way. And know that. And know that. And now that this project of the state, in which we poured in a lot of money in Israel, over $10,000 to make this thing go, now that it's moving normally on its own, this next thing will be the big project in Israel. And we've created, I don't know if I have it here, Izzy made up a 4-page little, a 4-page brochure on this. And that is going to be one of the major pieces of literature that Kach has. It's a controversial thing. You must understand this yourselves, and above all, you must agree with it. You must agree with it. You have to study it and see why it is so necessary. Otherwise, there's no hope for the country. There's no hope for the country. We have already today whole areas inside Israel which at nighttime Jews will not go to. Jews will not enter more and more parts of Israel. You cannot enter the old city of Akko at night. Jews are simply afraid. Whole areas of the Galilee, Jews will not go there. The army has to build access roads around our villages in the Galilee. Their confidence grows and grows and grows, and their hatred grows and grows. That is the reality of Israel today. They must be saved from themselves. They must be saved from themselves. So that is the project we have. Okay, now it's 3:54 until 4:30, over 35 minutes. Any question? And now, any question that you want. Yes.
Yes, you mentioned that the leaders of Gush Emunim refused to participate in the State of Aliyah project.
Yes.
It's a well-known fact that Rabbi Tzvi Cook, Zichrono Livracha, publicly endorsed you for the Knesset
Twice.
for re-election.
Twice.
Now he was the spiritual head of Gush Emunim.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be a good idea to publicize the fact that he endorsed you to Gush Emunim?
We publicized it on the anniversary of his death at Merkaz Rav Kook. He had a big, huge thing. We handed out copies of his letter, saying that Rabbi Kahane should be elected to the Knesset. He is the man that will save the Jewish people, and so on. Twice, plus a picture of Rav Kook and myself in his sukkah. He never took pictures with anybody. Never.
And they still wouldn't believe it?
They said that he was probably senile when he did that. Ad kedei kach, as they say in Israel.
You have to see the picture.
Yes, they said he was senile. That's the tragedy. That's the tragedy about their own rabbi. About their own rabbi. Yes, yes.
It was on the night of December 9/10 that Israel sent a landing force into Lebanon to destroy a certain underground base.
Right.
And 4 soldiers became detached from the main force because the communication system had broken down.
Right. And they left
And
them.
instead of the normal thing of having a detachment remain there to try to get them, they pulled out completely, and then they sent in a massive amount of helicopters completely exposed to Arab fire. Unfortunately, they saved these boys, but it was very strange for doing it that way instead of the normal military way. Dan Shomron, when interviewed, said that he did it for military as well as political reasons.
Right.
Could you expand on that political reason?
I have no idea. I have no idea what he meant. Any more than I have any idea what he meant when he said it's impossible to put down the Intifada. He should have been fired on the spot. I'll put it down in 2 days. What do you mean it's impossible to put down the Intifada? And when he said because it stems from nationalist reasons, he should have not only been fired but put on trial and court-martialed. I don't know. I have no idea why this man is allowed to stay chief of staff, or Mitzna is allowed to stay the head of the Central Command. A man who has made... Mitzna is a man who, during the Lebanese War, after Sabra Shatila, picked himself up and went home to his kibbutz. If a private would have done that, he'd have been court-martialed on the spot and given a year in jail. He was given the job of the Central Command. I don't understand Shamir. I don't understand Sharon. I don't understand any of these people. You ask me to explain? There are certain things which, the moment that you can begin to understand what they are doing, you're in big trouble. Yes?
What's the story with your American citizenship as of now?
Citizenship as of now, the State Department as of now claims I am not a citizen. I claim I am a citizen. State Department says, take us to court. We have taken them to court. They're in district, we are in federal district court in Washington now. There is no date yet set for the hearing. In the meantime, the State Department has refused to allow me into the country normally. I'm here in this country. They have agreed it may be a face-saving device. I hope it's so, because in that case, I'll get it on a regular basis. I'm here for consultation with my attorneys. And that's it. Now, it does not look good. It does not look good in district court. Nevertheless, it hasn't been, the hearing has not been held. And after this district court, there, of course, there is the Circuit Court of Appeals. And after that, there is the Supreme Court. The problem is, will they, if I should lose in district court, will they allow me into the country while the appeal is being heard? And the appeal can take a good 2 years. That is the problem. I have no idea what they will do. Therefore, that's where it stands right now. Now, it is clear that Israel's hand is in this. This is not just America. Because when I was fighting my original case, which I won back in 86, when I was fighting that then, they allowed me in regularly under a C of I, which is a document which is given to people who claim that they are citizens and they're fighting it in a court. They have not given me the same thing now, and the difference has got to be Israel. So that's where it stands now, and we'll see. Yeah, any other question? Yes.
Wouldn't this be a perfect spot for that little jerk, Shamir, to tell the State Department and the world that Kahane has taken over Judea? and pit you against Arafat and him to say, what
There's
can
no
we
question.
do?
No question about that. There is no question that if he was smart, he would say, look, what do you want from me? I'm ready to give it up. Look at these crazies. I can't fight them. You want to fight the Kahane, that's all. But for that, you have to be smart, and you also have to have kind of courage and faith necessary. And above all, you have to not be afraid that if you do that, Kahane will then pick up in the next election 40 seats.
But then you won't have all dead Jews around. What about your grandchildren and mine?
Well,
and
in any
Shamir's
case,
grandchildren?
listen, look, it is not easy to get people to do smart things. Let me give you an example. Many years ago, when JDL was running on bombing Russians, I met with the president of the American Jewish Committee, who at that time he had a big insurance firm in Newark. I forgot his name. And until I got to, of course, meet him and so on, he was afraid to meet me. He finally agreed to meet me in his office. And I said to him, look, let's work together.